I'm not going to talk about other stuff. If I do, stop me. I'm not going to talk about anything else. Just we're going to go through this and just be done with it. And I'm recording. Okay. So let's digestive system. How does food move through our body? What are some of the organs? What happens to the food? Just a little bit. The thing that goes down our throat, the food that we swallow, is called a bolus. Which the word's not on. Oh, there it is. Bolus. That's like a mass of food. It's really a mass of anything, right? They use it with IVs and stuff like that. But it just means like a mass. But here, that's what we call food that we swallow. So we swallow this food. It's going to go down our esophagus. So there's a few organs that we're going to talk about that the food moves through. One's the esophagus. I might need a darker pen. The esophagus, I look at it as like, well, not just me, a hallway. Because we need to get the food from our mouth to our stomach. All the organs that are responsible for digestion, they're all in the abdomen. But the real estate in the thorax is taken up by the lungs and the heart. So we don't have that space. So we got to get the food past the lungs and the heart down to the stomach. That's what the esophagus is for. So does it really do anything that big? Well, let's talk about this. Let me do the stomach really quick. The stomach liquefies the food. In other words, well, no, there's no other words. It turns it into like a slushy material. It's physically breaking down our food. That's what the stomach is going to do. So get it into the stomach, liquefy it, then the food's going to go into the small intestine. The small intestine that's where everything gets absorbed out of it. So vitamins, minerals, energy, this is where it enters our bloodstream or lymphatic system, whatever. This is where it gets absorbed. And then one last organ before we get rid of it, well, not really the last one, but the large intestine. And I'm using different colors here. Reclaim water. We want the water back. Because your stomach donated water to this food to make it liquid. We got to make it liquid so we can get all this good stuff out of it, so that we can absorb the stuff out of it. You got to make it liquid. You can't just leave it. But the large intestine, this food is going to leave us, so we want to get the water back from it, at least most of it. So we're going to talk, we're going to follow food as it goes through these organs. So, right now, we're just looking at the bolus as it goes down the esophagus. So if you look at the whole GI tract, like all this, there's 4 layers of tissue. So first of all, we have the lining. We have the lining of the esophagus, or lining of the stomach, or lining of even your mouth. What kind of tissue is that? Oh, you didn't think I'd ask you. What's the tissue that lines your esophagus? Not that one.
Smooth tissue?
It's not smooth muscle. First one we talked about. The word you maybe can't pronounce. Epithelial. The lining of everything is going to be epithelial tissue. So the lining of your esophagus is epithelial tissue. There's a layer of epithelial tissue. Underneath that is going to be some layer of connective tissue. What kind? Who cares? Underneath that, this is the important one. There's muscle. There's smooth muscle. There's 2 layers of smooth muscle. So there's a layer of smooth muscle running up and down the esophagus like that, and we call that longitudinal. What's that? That's muscle. There's 2 layers of muscle. There's a longitudinal layer and there's a circular layer.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
The longitudinal muscle is like running up and down, and then right outside of that is a circular layer that like circles around. And they're both smooth muscle, because if it's lining an organ, it's going to be smooth muscle. So you got a layer of muscle running up and down, and then you got another layer of muscle circling around it.
I'm not sure. I think it may have been like a gastrobasket.
They're going to.
So if you put a schedule on that schedule,
They're going to alternate. They're going to alternate their contractions. The longitudinal contracts, then the circular one. I'm going to mute you. If you're okay with that. I just did it. So, but if you got a question, just unmute yourself. So longitudinal contracts, circular contracts, they alternate in their contractions, and that pushes the food through the body. You can sometimes feel it, right? You can't feel the esophagus, but you feel it happening in your intestine. You feel it happening in your stomach for sure. Whenever your stomach is growling, that's the muscles. We call this peristalsis. You're feeling peristalsis. The alternating contractions of this smooth muscle. Right, in your stomach, when you don't have food and this muscle contracts, that's like what makes you feel hungry. That's your stomach growling. And then the 4th layer is whatever connective tissue, I don't care. We're talking about the muscle. So there's 2 layers of muscle that are lining this esophagus and stomach, small intestine, large intestine. Well, right now we're just talking about the esophagus. Right? So the layers of muscle, they're contracting, peristalsis, moving the food down into the stomach.
Hey, Mr. Cox, can you do us a favor?
What's that?
Can you actually specifically, like, at least when you finish, like, showing us everything, at the end of the class, can you make sure you tell us what's exactly class test or final quote?
What's exactly? No, but like what things that I might ask from? Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so let's look at this area right here. You have this, it's called a valve or sphincter. For some reason, they're talking about this sphincter, but that's not really as important as this one. I don't know why that one's not marked, but that one is called the cardiac sphincter. You have a series of these. I don't know if I spelled that right. You have a series of these, S-P-H-I-N-C-T-O. Got it. You have a series of these throughout your gastrointestinal tract. Their function is one of 2 possible functions. One, like this, is to prevent backflow. Once that food goes through your esophagus and goes into the stomach. You don't want it going back. It stays in the stomach now. So it's like if the esophagus is a hallway, the cardiac sphincter is a one-way door. Once you enter that, you leave the hallway, that's done. So it's a ring, it's like a ring of muscle. What's that? Prevents backflow. In this case, it prevents backflow. Sometimes it like slows down how fast the food goes through your body. But here, no. Here, it's just preventing it from going back because the stomach is full of acid.
Which one did you say? I forget. Was the one that makes your stomach growl, that makes the muscles contract to make your stomach growl?
Oh, that's called peristalsis.
Okay.
They're
And then-
longitudinal and circular muscles.
Oh, so that's all three of them do that.
Yeah, all of your GI tract, like the large intestine, small intestine, stomach, esophagus, it all has those muscles in it.
Right. I was just curious about the peristalsis and
All have peristalsis, but we don't feel. We usually feel it in our stomach. Sometimes you might feel it in your small intestine, but usually you feel it in your stomach.
Right. I just saw the three that you wrote down, and then when you said that, so I was just wondering if that was.
So peristalsis is the contraction of these two muscles.
Okay. Thank you.
In fact, in the case of the stomach, I'm going to add a third one because only the stomach has a third layer called oblique or diagonal. If you want to write diagonal, oops, I already started making a D. But in anatomy, we call diagonal things oblique. So you have longitudinal muscles, circular muscles, an oblique layer or diagonal layer. So your stomach has a third layer of muscles. That's not the case for the other organs, just your stomach. Smooth muscle. So with muscle, if it's not the heart and it's not attached to any bone, it's going to be smooth. Yeah, diagonal. They call it oblique. Diagonal is like oblique. So this actually has a third layer of muscle. So when you actually like look at a stomach, like you start like cutting into a stomach, you can like tease out the three layers. So like one of them's going like this, and one of them's going like that, and then one of them's going like across. So, but they're all, because your stomach is like pushing the food around. Like it's really contracting and moving, and it's like sloshing all this food back and forth. And it's a bunch of liquid that's like super acidic in your stomach. But your stomach has a layer of mucus. Like normally the acid would burn a hole in the epithelial tissue. So your stomach is lined with epithelial tissue. Normally the acid would burn through that. But there's a layer of mucus on top of that epithelial tissue. That's protecting the stomach. It's protecting like the wall of the stomach, the epithelial tissue. But your esophagus doesn't have that protection. So if that acid goes back up into your esophagus, that's what, they call it heartburn or GERD or reflux, whatever you want to call it. But that's what's happening. You're feeling the acid go into your esophagus. You don't have that protection. By the way, they call it cardiac sphincter. This, not that it's important, but like this region right up at the top is called the cardia. Right? It's not really related to the stomach. And I know they call it like heartburn. It's because like the stomach's here, and then the cardiac sphincter is like right about here, and the apex of my stomach, the heart, the apex of my heart is about here. So they're kind of close. So when that, like the apex, like the pointy part of the heart is kind of like around here. So when that goes up, like if acid goes up here, it could feel like it's your heart. So anyway, that sphincter, when this bolus comes down your esophagus, that sphincter opens up. It's like a closed fist. It opens up, lets the food through, and then it shuts back again. And then the food's in the stomach. So let's talk about the stomach. That's not even close. All right, so here's the stomach. Up here is like a little, it might be hard to see, but there's like that's the cardiac sphincter. If you're looking at this in a book or something, they might call it lower esophageal. That's fine too, but it's the cardiac sphincter. And then here's the food, and it's getting sloshed back and forth in the stomach, like in acid. And that's like physically breaking up the food. So when the food goes into the stomach, we call it a bolus. When the food, by the time the stomach is done with it, we're going to call it something different. We're going to call it chyme. I know it's like CHY, but it's like pronounced chyme. So chyme is like, it's like a slushy consistency. So that's the function of the stomach. The function of the stomach is to turn the bolus into chyme. That's the function of the stomach. And so what is it about the stomach that the stomach can turn the bolus into chyme? Like, why does the stomach liquefy your food and not your esophagus? Like, what's so special about the stomach? Well, we already talked about one thing. The stomach has 3 layers of muscle. Right, so it's got the 3 muscle layers, smooth muscle. And we talked about that, like I wrote that on the board. It was oblique or diagonal, longitudinal, circular. So there's an extra layer of muscle really pushing that food around. And I'm writing HCl, but you need to know that that stands for hydrochloric acid. So it's acid.
So acid, it's acid that helps the food kind of really much move through the stomach.
It helps it. So if you're like eating bread, it's going to turn it into liquid. If you're eating a bunch of pizza crust, it's going to turn that into liquid. It's going to physically beat it and make it liquid.
What is HCl?
Hydrochloric acid. Hydro stands for hydrogen, chloric for chlorine, so hydrochloric. And that's what your stomach produces. So this is like, if you look at the lining of your stomach, they make these pits, like gastric pits, right? So there's like, it goes down into it. So this is where all the food is hanging out. And then these are the pits. And you see these are all these epithelial cells. It might be hard to see from where you're at, but they're looking like columnar cells. So it looks like a single layer of columnar cells that line the stomach. And they've got them labeled here. Mucus cells, chief cells, parietal cells. Some of these cells are mucus cells, so that's kind of easy as to what they make. They make mucus. Mucus cells make mucus. They make the mucus that's going to line the stomach and protect it from that acid. the chief cells are going to make an enzyme, one of probably 10 enzymes I'm going to tell you about that you're going to need to know. This one is called pepsin. Usually enzymes cannot handle this much acid. The pH of the stomach, the pH of the gastric juices in the stomach is about 2, 1.8 to 2. So, the pH scale goes from like 0 to 14, right? And the lower the number you get, the more acidic it is. And so if you look at like vinegar would have a pH of like 3. So it's like 10 times more acidic than, more than 10 times really, but it's at least 10 times more acidic than vinegar. It's very acidic. And what was my point? Usually an enzyme wouldn't be able to handle that. It would get denatured. Most enzymes would get like destroyed. Denatured is a term we call it. Pepsin's different. It's designed to handle the pH of the stomach. I want you to know the enzyme and I want you to know the substrate. The substrate is the thing that the enzyme works on. So in this case, all these enzymes break down food. So pepsin is for proteins. Pepsin breaks down proteins. So make like an enzyme list. Put pepsin as your first one. Where do you find pepsin? In the stomach. What does it work on? What's the substrate? Proteins. So have a list somewhere, a list of enzymes. Your first one's pepsin. The substrate is proteins made in the stomach. And the chief cells make it.
You said you said pepsin is an enzyme?
Yes.
So enzyme.
Most enzymes are going to end with ASE. But there are a few enzymes that end with like IN.
The enzymes is spelled E-N-Z-E-M.
ENZYME. I'm not really talking to you about it, but technically pepsin is made inactive. Because pepsin is an enzyme that breaks down proteins. So if the cell itself makes pepsin, the pepsin would dissolve the cell that made it. So you got to make it inactive, but it's fine. Okay. So chief cells make pepsin, parietal cells make hydrochloric acid. So you got like these 3 different types of cells. There's actually more than that, but for now, there's 3 types of cells that line the stomach. Mucus cells, chief cells, parietal cells. So what is the function of the stomach? Because that's a probable question. What's the function of the stomach? And how is the stomach adapted to perform that function? Meaning like, what is it about the stomach that it could break down food? The function of the stomach is to liquefy your food. So they say that like form fits function. What is it about the stomach that allows it to do that job? Well, it's got 3 muscle layers. It's got a 3rd layer of muscle, and it produces acid, unlike other parts of your body. So let me erase this. All right. Here's the stomach. This right here is going to be the small intestine. I'll have it on another picture. Actually, if I got a better picture, I'm just going to go to it. That one looks better, actually. Let me do this one instead. Okay. Here's your esophagus. Here's your stomach. So right in between here, we call this the pyloric sphincter or pyloric valve. It's another sphincter. It's the second one that we've talked about. Right here, they're not really showing it to you, but right here is the cardiac sphincter, and that's to prevent backflow of the acid. This is to not prevent backflow, but it's to slow down how much of this chyme goes into the small intestine. So the pink is the small intestine. This is the stomach. We want to control how much food moves into the stomach. Out of the stomach. We want to control how much food moves out of the stomach. We only want about half of a teaspoon at a time going into here. And that's really for two reasons. One, the function of the small intestine is to absorb nutrients. So you don't want to dump everything from here into here, because that's too much. Like, you can't absorb everything. You just want to give it a little bit at a time and let it absorb all the stuff out of it. But the second reason is that it's acid. You don't want to dump a bunch of acid in here, because you're going to get an ulcer in your duodenum. You can get an ulcer here in your stomach. You can get an esophageal ulcer. You can get a duodenal ulcer. Duodenum, that's what they call this first part of your small intestine. I don't care if you know it, but they use the word a lot. But you can get an ulcer anywhere. Like if the mucus gets really thin in your stomach, you'll get an ulcer, like a peptic ulcer. Right? Or if you keep having gastric or acid reflux or GERD or something, you'll get an ulcer in your esophagus because you keep putting acid in your esophagus and it burns through the epithelial tissue. Or if your pyloric valve is not working right and too much acid keeps going into your small intestine, you can get an ulcer there. So the pyloric valve slows the amount of food that exits. These are both talking to the brain. So these are both like wired up to the brain, and they're both competing with each other. The stomach keeps telling the brain, hey brain, open up the pyloric valve. Let me get rid of all the stuff I have in my stomach. The intestine keeps telling the brain, close the pyloric valve. Because the stomach just gave me some food. I need to deal with this food. Tell the stomach to knock it off. Tell this guy to stop eating. The stomach keeps sending a message up to the brain. Okay, open this up. Let me get rid of this food. I want to get some more food in. But anyway, this small intestine is going to absorb food. So the pyloric sphincter is in between the stomach and the small intestine. So the job of the small intestine is to absorb things. Since we have it up here, let's talk about these other things. So you notice that you have a liver, a gallbladder, and a pancreas. And if you notice that there's a duct, like a tube, leading into the small intestine. So they're making stuff that is going to get put into the small intestine. So these three are accessory organs. This is not part of your GI tract, but they're helping. So we call them accessory organs: liver, gallbladder, pancreas. So let's start with the liver. The liver has lots of jobs, but as you see here, one of its jobs is to produce bile, which people confuse with like, they think of bowel movements or bowel, or they think of throwing up. It's not either of that. Bile, I know the word emulsify, I'm just trying to think of like a better way to say it. Okay, let's say you were to drink olive oil, right? I know it's kind of stupid, but let's say you were to drink some olive oil, like a cup of olive oil, right? It's already liquid, right? So your stomach doesn't have to liquefy it. It's already liquefied. It's oil. But that doesn't mean that you can absorb it once it gets into the intestine, even though it's liquid. It's still chemically too big. The molecules of fat, even though it's liquid, are way too big to get absorbed through the wall of this intestine. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to get an enzyme in there. There's an enzyme called lipase. ASE for like means enzyme, and LIP lipid, right? So lipase breaks up lipids. There's an enzyme that will break the fat down, you know, the oil, the olive oil. It'll break it down into smaller molecules. But even if you drink like olive oil, the molecules are too big even for the lipase. The lipase can't break the molecules of fat down because they're too big. So you have to make the fat molecules, I keep saying fat, lipid, olive oil, lipids. You have to make it small enough so that lipase can go and break it down. And that's what bile does. So when you eat something with fat, bile is getting secreted and put down this tube, and it's coming in here, and it's making the fat droplets smaller. So we want to physically break down our food, and we want to chemically break it down. You've got to make everything, all these molecules, tiny.
Where's lipase?
Lipase is going to come from the pancreas. But before the lipase is going to work, bile has to come in and make it small, like make it smaller. So bile's like an emulsifier. It makes the big fat droplets smaller.
Did you just get on this slide?
Yeah.
So it's made in the pancreas, but needs bile to break it down first to function properly.
Wait, say it again?
It's made in the pancreas, but needs bile to break it down to function properly.
Yes. So the lipase won't be able to, if bile doesn't make those fat droplets, those drops of fat smaller, lipase isn't going to be able to work. The gallbladder does not make bile, but it holds it. Because you're making bile right now, but what if you didn't eat any fats today? You don't need it. So the bile is going to come and go up here into the gallbladder. And then later on, you're eating you decide to go out and get Indian food. Then now you're going to push a bunch of extra bile, because that's some oily food. You're going to push some extra bile into, oh hell, why am I talking about Indian food? You go to Rocky and Carlos, then you're going to have to squeeze some extra bile into here. Do they even have any Indian restaurant? All right. No, I promise. So the gallbladder doesn't make bile, but it just holds it, it stores it. So we have the liver. Liver makes bile. Does lots of things, but for here, it makes bile. Gallbladder stores bile. So we got those two accessory organs. We know what those two do. Now the pancreas. pancreas is going to do a few things. The one thing that it does is it makes a bunch of enzymes, but we're not going to talk about the enzymes yet. Let's talk about the other thing that it does. It'll make enzymes that deal with sugar.
Wait, what's lipase?
Huh?
What's lipase? See, I'm lost because I walked in.
It's recorded.
Oh, thanks.
Go, because I can't. Because I promised I wouldn't get too sidetracked.
Right.
The first thing it's going to do is make something like a antacid. Your pancreas makes an antacid, which we call bicarbonate. Sodium bicarbonate, like baking soda. Bicarbonate, yeah. It makes sodium bicarbonate, or we just call it bicarb for short. Bicarbonate is an antacid. It has a pH of it's high. It's like 8.4. It's not super high, but it's definitely not 2. All right, so coming from your stomach is something with a pH of like 2. And then coming down this tube is a pH of like 8, just around it, right? So the 8 meets the 2, and then we could just pretend that they balance each other out, and we come into the middle. Right? Let's say it's 5, right? So you're thinking, well, it's 2, and it only goes to 5. 5's still an acid. 5's not like 7's neutral, so it's below 7, so it's still an acid. But every number is times 10. So when you go from 2 to 3, that's 10 times less acidic. When you go from 2 to 4, 100 times. 2 to 5, 1,000 times. So even if we were to look at it like that, it's 1,000 times less acidic because of the bicarbonate.
Is that why you can't look at it?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons.
Wait, isn't pancreas?
It's one of the many reasons.
Is pancreas pendant?
Pancreas what?
Is pancreas is appendix?
Appendix? No, appendix is going to be part of your large intestine.
Oh.
You'll see a picture of it in a minute. So, without a pancreas, you can't make your. Well, the first thing that's going to happen is that the pancreas makes some hormones, like insulin. So before anything else, your blood sugar is going to go up. All right, so you're going to die from the lack of hormones before you die from anything else. But you're not going to be able to break down your food. You can physically break it down because the stomach's going to turn it into liquid, right? And then it's going to go into here, but there's no enzymes coming from the pancreas. So you're not going to be able to chemically break down any of your food. So if you can't chemically break it down, make them smaller molecules, then you're not going to absorb it. So it's going to just pass right through you. Your stomach will break it down. Your stomach will spend all this energy breaking it down and adding water to it to liquefy it. Then you're not going to absorb it. You're not going to absorb any of the nutrients. So yeah, enzymes. That's what the pancreas does. No idea which one I'm at.
So bicarbonate is also an enzyme?
Bicarbonate is not an enzyme. But this list up here, when I make it larger, is going to be enzymes. I'm going to maybe write them bigger. And you don't have to know all these enzymes. So bicarbonate is an antacid. It's just like sodium bicarbonate or baking soda. It's baking soda. It's essentially baking soda. Your body makes baking soda. It uses it not only for your intestine, but it uses it for your blood too, to try to keep your blood from getting too acidic. But that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering because when we were on that last graph, you were saying the pancreas and enzymes, and then last, I was writing stuff down about bicarbonate. So when you said pancreas and enzymes,
So
that's what I thought.
bicarbonate, so the pancreas makes like two things that as far as the digestive system, it makes bicarbonate and enzymes. So I was confusing there. I talked about the bicarbonate, but I didn't talk about any enzymes. Yeah, so bicarbonate is not, we actually consider bicarbonate, and I don't know why we do this, but we consider it an electrolyte. It's not technically an electrolyte. It's not like, an electrolyte is like sodium and potassium, and they're minerals. Right? Bicarbonate is not a mineral. It's, well, it doesn't matter what it is, but but for some reason we call it an electrolyte. So like in hospital, when they want to like, when they give you electrolytes, they put sodium bicarbonate in it. So the pancreas makes that to lower the pH. I mean, to raise the pH, to make it less acidic. And then the pancreas makes a bunch of enzymes. So we could start with lipase first, because we already wrote that word down. So there's lipase. Lipase, the substrate for lipase is lipids. Lipase breaks down lipids. So this little thing's telling you that, like, okay, what happens to fat? How does fat get digested? Well, bile makes the fat droplets smaller, and then the lipase breaks them down even smaller so that we can absorb it. Shoulders all jacked up.
Are we gonna get a 10-minute break today?
So I'm not doing this on camera. What's next? Let's talk about carbohydrates. So amylase, that's the enzyme that breaks down starch. It is in your saliva, amylase. Like we did those of you in lab, we did a lab on it where we spit. The spit had this amylase in it. I'm going to write it bigger.
So spit has amylase.
Yeah, but the problem is that like your spit mixes in with, like, let's say it's like a piece of bread, right? And the amylase in your spit mixes in with the bread and starts to chemically break it down. Your teeth are physically breaking the bread down, right? You're chewing it and stuff. The amylase is chemically taking the starch and breaking up the molecules. But when it goes into your stomach, remember your stomach's acidic, so that just denatures it. So we make it again in your pancreas. So we got 2 enzymes so far that are from your pancreas. Lipase, substrate lipids. Amylase, substrate is starch. Or if you want to say, you can say carbohydrates, because starch is a carbohydrate.
So the amylase just breaks down carbohydrates?
Yeah, you can say that. I mean, to be more specific, it breaks down starch, but I mean, starch is a carbohydrate. So we've got, so far on your enzyme list, you have 3 enzymes. You have pepsin, that's made in your stomach. You have lipase, that's in your pancreas. And then you have amylase, also in your pancreas. And then I'm going to give you 4 more right now that all deal with proteins. So the next 4 that I'm going to write, the substrate is proteins. And they're here, but I'm going to write them up here. Trypsin, trypsin, and then the same word with the word chyme before it. Trypsin, chymotrypsin. Again, these are enzymes, they're not ending with ASE, but some enzymes don't end with ASE. Trypsin, chymotrypsin, those both, the substrate for those two proteins. And then there's another one, elastase. Elastase breaks down elastic fibers. So all the fibers are proteins. There's tons and tons of these enzymes that break down proteins. I'm just giving you 4 from the pancreas. There's more. The last one, I'm going to give you one of these two. I'll do the top one. Amino. Remember that word amino? It's like functional group. We have a functional group called amino. Amino, which I spelled wrong. AMINO. And then peptide. And then ASE at the end. It's a long word. But they're words you've seen before. You know the word peptide, you know what ASE means, and you've seen the word amino before. So that was one of the functional groups going back a few weeks. So you can actually guess what it does. It rips the amino group off of the protein, off the amino acid. Right? And you see, if you can see up here, there's one underneath it that you don't have to know, but it's called carboxypeptidase. So if you remember, like an amino acid, it had 2 functional groups on it. Amino on one end, carboxyl on the other end. So that kind of tells, like, this enzyme rips the carboxyl off. This enzyme rips the amino off, but whatever. These 4 work on proteins. So if you look at your enzyme list, digestive enzymes, you should have like 7 on there. 6 from the pancreas, and then that 1 from the stomach. Right? So you have 7 enzymes. Out of those 7 enzymes, 5 of them have a protein substrate. 5 of them deal with proteins. Only 1 of them is dealing with lipids, and only 1 of them so far is dealing with carbohydrates. You see how much effort your body's spending to break down proteins? We're starting in the stomach. Like, we didn't even wait for the food. So proteins, your body spends the most time trying to break down. So if you're trying to feel full, satiated, we call satiety or satiation that being full, like feeling full. If you want to feel satiated, the best food is proteins. That is what's going to, ounce for ounce, proteins are going to make you feel the most full. Because really, what is being full? Is it about physically having a bunch of food in your stomach? No, it's about sending a signal up to your brain, to your hypothalamus, to tell you, stop eating. Proteins are going to do it. Because when you put a bunch of proteins in your intestine sends a signal up to the brain. Stop eating. There's a delay. There's like a 10-minute delay. So while your intestines are sending that signal up to the brain, you're still like, but which is really one of life's cruel. It's one of your body's cruel jokes that it plays on you.
And you said elastase breaks down elastic protein?
Yeah, and I just kind of threw that in there. Elastase breaks down elastic fibers. And I'm kind of driving the point home that so many things in your body are made out of proteins. So we talked about like those fibers. collagen, elastic, reticular. I was telling you how collagen make things like strong. Those fibers are all made out of proteins. Everything is made out of proteins, right? I keep pushing. If you ever take me for anatomy, I keep pushing proteins. Protein, protein, protein. It's so much more than just steak, just meat and beans. Protein's like everything that makes you in your body. So you need enzymes to deal with all of that. So I'm only giving you like 4, or like on your list, you probably have 5 right now. That's all we're gonna do. But really, there's so many more. This is just like the top 5. So right now your enzyme list has 7 on it. I'm gonna stop for that. I'll add 3 in a few minutes, but for the pancreas, that's it. So you have 7 enzymes, and 6 of them are made in your pancreas. So let me erase all of this. So again, that was a summation.
Yeah.
That was a summation of this slide that I'm going to try to get it to go on. What does the pancreas do? It makes 6 enzymes that you wrote down, and it makes sodium bicarbonate, which is not an enzyme, it's a antacid. So that's what the pancreas does. A little bit complicated, but and the pancreas does some other things that don't have to do with digestion. Same thing with the liver. Liver does a bunch of things, but we're just talking about the digestive process, right? So these 3 accessory organs are working to prepare the food to be absorbed. Right? We want to make this like less acidic, and then we want to break everything down into the smallest little molecule we can. If you eat bread, you can't absorb, like if you eat a potato, you can't absorb starch. Your body does not absorb starch. Starch does not go into your bloodstream. You've got to turn that into glucose. Then it'll go into your blood. So that's what the enzymes do. They're going to break these. They're going to break your food down into the tiniest molecules possible. Did I pause this? Okay. The small intestine absorbs things. That's the function of the small intestine, absorption. How is it? What's so special about the small intestine that it absorbs sugar and stuff? Like, why can't your esophagus absorb stuff? Or why can't your stomach absorb things? Why is it just your small intestine? The small intestine has some things about it that allows it to absorb. So, if you remember the stomach had like these pits. So if you looked at the wall of the stomach, it went down like that. There were all these pits. But if you look at the intestine, it does the opposite. I don't know if you can remember that picture that I showed you of the intestine. It was like a round intestine and it had all these little finger-like things. But that was this. So we call this villi. So the intestine absorbs nutrients. And how does it do it? It's got villi. These villi are like little finger-like projections that go into the intestinal wall. So like, let's say, like we have an intestine. Let's look at, all right, if we were looking down the esophagus, it'll look like that, right? This is me looking down your throat, down your esophagus. The wall of the esophagus is just smooth, right? And then if we do the same thing with your stomach, and I take like a slice of your stomach and we just look into it, it'll look like something like that. I can't. This is where the food is, and then they got like these pits. They go down. If I look down your small intestine, it's going to look the other way. It's going to have all these villi. I always laugh at myself when I suck so bad at this. Whatever. Get it. There's all these projections coming up. All these villi are coming up. So if I take, let's say I want to take this, and I'm going to just cut it right here, and I'm going to lay it out flat. So I'm going to cut it, and then I'm going to take it and make it flat. It'll be like that long, or however long. I don't know. Let's say I take this thing and I cut it here, and I'm going to stretch it out and make it flat. It'll be much longer. Just, even though if you look at the tubes, they're like the same, right? The tubes are both like the same lumen area, right? But if I were to cut this, and like lay it flat, flatten it out, it'd be much longer with the small intestine, right? So the key word here is surface area. You have villi. Villi, villi, singular is villus, that doesn't matter. What it matters is what it does. The villi increase surface area.
So the villi are hollow, not solid structures? If you can lay them
Yes.
flat, they must be hollow.
Well, no, you can't actually lay them flat. I was
Okay.
just like pretend that you could. I was trying to make the point that there's so much more area inside of that. But inside the villi, you have a lot of blood vessels. So this is also where the villus, this is where the nutrients enter your bloodstream. So like when you eat pancakes, how does your blood sugar go up? Right? It's, why does your blood sugar go up? Because of the villus, the villi. Because your small intestines made the pancakes, they turned that starch into glucose. Of course, the syrup is already glucose, so you didn't really need to do much with that. But the starch from the pancake itself was turned into glucose, and then it enters your bloodstream right in the villi. So this is a place in your body where your blood sugar starts to go up. So inside the villi, there's blood vessels. And if you look at the villi, so I'm just drawing one, they look like that. Like there's one villus, one finger-like projection, but they have all these cells. What kind of cells are these, by the way? This is like the lining of the intestine. So what kind of tissue is it?
Mucus.
That would be true for the stomach. Although mucus isn't a tissue, it's just like mucus is like snot. So what is it?
Smooth tissue.
Why are you guys not answering this again? But you said something, so that's good.
Epithelial tissue?
Yes. Redeem yourself. Epithelial tissue. Now let me ask you another question. What do these cells look like? Are they single or stratified?
Single.
One layer. I don't have another layer and another layer.
Single.
What do they look like? Are they flat? They're not flat. Do they look like a box, like a cube? Do they look like a column? If you had to pick one of those,
Yes, probably.
single columnar. Not that you need to know that for the test, but I just want you to put into practice. So columnar cells. I'm a little committed to this process here, so I'm going to finish it out. These cells are like absorptive cells. They absorb things, right? So, and then inside here, since I'm already doing this, let me do some colors here. There's my bloodstream. Right, so let's say I'm a piece of sugar, like here's a piece of glucose. That used to be pancakes. In your body, enzymes broke it up, and now it's just glucose. That glucose is just going to squeeze in between these two cells here and go into your bloodstream. And of course, if we want to follow the story of glucose, like what happens to this black glucose thing now? That would be that whole chapter on Krebs cycle, blah, 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 that one that you already finished the test. But this is just like, how do we get the food from our stomach, or like when we eat it, how do we get it into our blood? It just squeezes in between the cells here and it enters your bloodstream. So we had enzymes, like amylase. It made the starch smaller and smaller and smaller. But the villi increase the surface area. You have so much more surface with the villi. But if you look at each of these cells, you can't really see it. I'm going to take one of these cells and make it bigger. And then at the top here, it looks like that. So the villi have like little villi on top of them. So it'd be like right here. No, I'm going the wrong way. My villi need to be here. But it doesn't matter. They're so small that like we can't see these. Like even if we try to look under a microscope, like a really high power microscope, I can't see them. I can see what looks like a brush. Like if you're looking at a brush, you can't see like the individual things on the brush. You can only see that it looks like a brush. So we call this actually two things. I can call it microvilli, like little tiny villi. Or what I could say about this area is that it looks like a brush. So it's like a brush border. But you could call it microvilli, right? So microvilli are going to do the same thing. That even further increases the surface area. I want lots and lots of surface area because I'm going to absorb stuff. Because the job of the small intestine is to absorb things. How do they do it? It has villi. It has microvilli. We're past break time, huh? It has villi. It has microvilli. And I'm going to tell you a third thing. But before we do that, I want you to add 3 more enzymes to your enzyme list. Because these microvilli, they make your last 3 enzymes. One of them you heard of before. You've heard of lactase. You've heard of lactose, right? The milk sugar. Lactase breaks down lactose. You've heard of sucrose. Sucrase breaks down sucrose. And then maltase breaks down maltose. You had those 3 words before, lactose, sucrose, maltose, but it was a while ago. You probably forgot it, and that's okay.
All this is in small intestine?
What's that?
This is all in the small intestine?
Yeah. So yeah, you could say small intestine. Or if you wanted to be more specific, you could say microvilli. Both answers are correct. Because microvilli is part of the small intestine. So now your enzyme list should have 10 enzymes on it, and that's the complete list. Just because that's like a nice even place to stop. Lactase, sucrase, maltase, those are also carbohydrates. technically they're sugars, right? Because if you look at carbs, when you eat carbs, there's 3 types of carbs that you eat. You're eating starch, you're eating sugar, or you're eating fiber. Fiber is like the crunchy. Vegetables are mostly starch, right? Vegetables aren't generally sweet tasting. So I'm sorry, not starch, fiber. So vegetables are generally fiber, right? Lettuce is fiber. That's a carbohydrate. If you're eating a banana, that's starch. But bananas are a little sweet too, right? So that's starch and sugar. Or if you're eating rice, that's just starch. Right? So there's 3 types of carbs: starch, fiber, sugar. Fiber, forget it. We can't break down fiber. It goes through us. So really, we have starch and sugar. You got to break down starch and you got to break down sugar. These are the things for the sugars. Starch broken down by amylase. You could just say carbohydrates. So you've got 4 enzymes that break down carbohydrates. You have 5 enzymes that break down proteins. You have 1 enzyme that breaks down lipids. So that should be your list. Let's take a few minutes, like 5 minutes or so. Let's take like a 5-minute break. Just get whatever, stand up, reorganize your notes, collect your thoughts, whatever. And then I'll finish talking about the small intestine. I'll talk about the large intestine, and then I'll go over and like highlight some of the important things from this chapter. So let's take a few minutes. I'm going to keep recording. So if you're watching a video of this, just skip ahead 5 minutes. Yeah. Yeah. And functional groups? Yeah. I mean, that's not the first one.
I was just saying.
Did you do the functional groups?
Eh?
Amino, carboxyl, carbohyl. Those videos like
They only had 1 for the
2 or 3.
I mean, shit.
Yes. Yes. I put that. We ready? Yeah. This. Video, video, video. These first 2 are quiz 1. These 4 are exam. Yeah, what you gotta do is here up. So you gotta like, you gotta do something to it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, I put like Monday. Whenever we talk.
Yeah.
That's it. Oh, you're right.
That's what I'm saying.
Come with me for a second.
I remember, like, I really
Yeah, I've got that one. This is what I said. And this one. Do this one too. So
I got that.
yeah.
What?
Yeah, good. I'm back. Huh? You don't need to do
That's what I said. I think I did exam too. See, look.
that. This is great. You already did it.
No, this one.
That's a quiz.
Yeah, I didn't
The
either.
last one. That's the
Grant.
point. Yeah.
Ah.
All right, so digestive system, you have your enzyme list complete now. And then going back to microvilli. The purpose of the small intestine is to absorb nutrients. That's the function of the small intestine. How is it adapted? Like, how is the small intestine made so that it can absorb nutrients? There's three things. We've talked about two of them. One, it has villi. Villi increase the surface area. Two, they have microvilli, which do the same thing. Microvilli increase the surface area. Three, it has these things called circular folds. So what circular folds do is like pretend that this is the intestine and like food's moving through it, right? And so if this is like a pipe and that water flows through the pipe, the water would just be down here at the bottom, right? Because of gravity, right? And none of the water would be up at the top. So if you're talking about like water flowing through a pipe, what about this part? All right, so with the intestine is folded in such a way that the food has to spiral, the chyme has to spiral through it. So all, like this part up here also gets chyme, as well as this part at the bottom. Right, so, if you're like looking through it, the chyme is not going to be just down here at the bottom. It's going to spiral through. So all of this up here also gets the chyme. So circular folds force the chyme into a circular motion. So every part of it gets a chance to absorb. So these three things make the small intestine very efficient at absorbing nutrients. So this is just showing you the villi, and then at the top of this villi, top of these cells, you see the microvilli, and then this whole thing has circular folds in it, like they're saying right here, large circular folds that it like forces the chyme to go around like this, so all of it gets a chance to absorb. And then you notice that there's like blood vessels here. Here's blood vessels coming up and down. Right, so this is where the food enters the bloodstream. If it's like a little protein, like here's a little amino acid, the little amino acid is going to squeeze in between these blood cells and enter the blood. Right? Or if it's a little piece of glucose, same thing. Or a little piece of fat, the little piece of fat will go actually here. It doesn't really go into your blood because if you think about blood is water soluble. So water and oil don't mix, right? So the oil doesn't really go into your blood stream. It's got to use something else, which is called like a lymphatic system. Like your lymph nodes, for example, so that's like another set of vessels in your body that carry things around your body. We're not going to get into that. All right, so let me go back to like the whole digestive system, like that first slide. Let's see if I got another slide. Not anything good. Okay. Let's go back to this guy. Can I make it bigger on here? Touching things.
Are we gonna review today? Since I
Oh,
was late?
so- First, I'm going to finish this, and then.
I was just asking.
Yeah, no, we are. Like right after this, in about 5 minutes, I'm going to go over some stuff from this chapter. We still got one more thing to talk about. The appendix is hard to see on this, but, well, this right here is blown up, so it's right there. Like I'm coloring it in green. That's your appendix. So these are your small intestines right here. This is your large intestine. Here, here. So it goes up. It ascends. So they call this like the ascending colon. Then it I don't care about that if you know the names. Transverse colon, descending colon, and then this right here is like under your sink, like how the plumbing makes a P trap. That's the sigmoid colon, and so in that, all of this is the large intestine, right? And the purpose of the large intestine is to reclaim water. You want to get about 80 to 90% of the water back from your food. That's the main job of the large intestine. Get the water back from food. So here in your small intestine, it's still liquid. We still call it chyme. As it goes through here, it becomes feces, like the water starts to get absorbed from it. If it stays in there too long, that would lead to constipation. If it doesn't stay in there long enough, if the food moves through too quickly, that's what causes diarrhea. That's like one of the dangers of diarrhea with like kids or people with food poisoning is dehydration, because the stomach had donated water, but you're not getting it back in the large intestine. So yeah. Then the food goes into the rectum, store it there until you get enough of it, and then it goes out. I think you know how that process works. So what are some things from this that I'd like you to know about? Well, one, what's the function of the stomach? What's the function of the stomach? And then like what you should be able to talk about some of the features of the stomach that allow it to do that function. So that's one possible thing that I'll ask you about. I could take the same question and I could take the word stomach and just replace it with small intestine.
Hey, what's that? Is that adapted?
Huh?
Adapt? That's what it is?
Yeah,
It's adapt?
adaptive. Like what is so special about the small intestine that it could do whatever its job is? What's the job of the small intestine? Tell me something about it that lets it do that job.
Are you asking like, so if we give an answer there, it'd probably be like, so it goes from the mouth to the esophagus to like that whole system? Can we just say that, or are you looking for?
No, I'm looking. Wait, hold on. No, I'm looking for the small intestine, like just that. Like, what's the job of the small intestine? Just the small intestine. What are some features of the small intestine? Like, talk about some of the features that let it do that job. And that's all on this. Just go back about 5 minutes from this point, and you'll find that. For the stomach, go back further. Then, so all this is on the video. Then what? Then you have your enzymes. enzymes. You have 10. I'm not going to ask you about all 10, but what I usually do is I might ask you about, like, what are the enzymes with protein substrates? Or what are the enzymes with carbohydrate substrates?
The protein substance would be peps. I say pepsin.
Pepsin? Yeah, those are all, just go back about 20 minutes and you'll find that. All of these are in this video,
Not helping.
which you're going to have to watch. If you're thinking right now, give me the answer to the questions that you're putting, I'm not giving you the answer.
Not this one.
No, I shouldn't have before, because I know that a lot of people are just interested. What are the answers to test questions? Let me put down that, finish the class. I get it. I get it. That's all that I care about too. That's all we care about, right?
I'm just more or less trying to look for
No, I
find out
understand.
what kind of answer you're looking for, just to make sure.
Oh, it's in
Because, I mean-
it's in the lecture.
It's just like you got 10 enzymes. It's
Mhm.
like, okay, it'll be a waste of time for me to study all 10. You probably
No, you have to study all 10 because you don't know which one I'm going to ask.
Oh,
Yeah, and that's the other thing you're trying to. If you want me to narrow things down, I'm sort of narrowing it down, but I'm really not. It's just the illusion of me narrowing things down. It's really the whole lecture, and it's always been like that. It's just that by me telling you things, you guys feel better, but I haven't given you any special information.
When I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say when we were talking about lactase, sucrase, and maltase, are those enzymes that break down sugars?
Yes. And what's another thing what are sugars? I'm just kind of opening it up. Which one of those three molecules are sugars?
Wasn't
Are
all
sugars proteins?
No.
What are they if they're not proteins? Come on, if you learn anything from this class, at least know like what kind of food is sugars. If you're eating
Banana.
honey, what kind of food is that? What is steak? What kind of food is steak? You're eating a steak. What is that?
it's protein.
The protein. Steak's a protein. What's rice?
Starch.
It's starch. And what's starch? Like
Starch.
What are the three?
It's carbohydrates.
Carbohydrate. Yeah, that's all I'm looking for. Sorry. So, yes, sugar. You're absolutely right. These lactase, maltase, sucrase, those are all enzymes that break down sugars, but they're also carbohydrates. Like either one. I know one. You're right. You're right. Like what you said. That's it. Done. I should have stopped it there. But you could put either one. So your enzyme list. What enzymes? Talk about the enzymes with a protein substrate. You know, where are they made? What are they? Where are they made? Or I could say it about carbohydrates. What are the enzymes that have a carbohydrate substrate?
How many enzymes are protein substances?
It's all on that list. Just go back
I only got
about
one.
10, 15.
4.
Just watch the video. You'll see it. You'll see it. And then where are they made? So you got enzymes. Then I might ask about one of these two sphincters. Or maybe both. You know, what are their functions? You know, what are they and what's their purpose? What do they do? And these are in the video. And the last thing that I could ask you about from this chapter are the accessory organs. The three accessory organs that were in the abdomen. So those three were the pancreas, the liver, the gallbladder. So I would just want you to discuss the three accessory organs. So, what's the pancreas like? How does the pancreas contribute to digesting your food? Or how does the gallbladder contribute? How does the liver contribute? You don't have to talk about everything that the liver does. We didn't talk about anything except for bile. The gallbladder, just bile. Right? The pancreas, we only talked about the enzymes that it makes. You don't have to list the enzymes because that's a different question. You just talk about how the pancreas makes these digestive enzymes. And talk about bicarbonate. What does bicarbonate do?
Was that a question or was that just for the review?
That's a question. Wait, which part?
No, I was asking, did you want us to answer that, or is that just something you're going to put down?
I would want you to to answer it. Like I'll say, maybe I could ask you just discuss the accessory organs that are in your abdomen, and
Got it.
You say a few words about maybe the pancreas is going to be like a couple sentences at most. Then the gallbladder, that's easy. It stores bile, right? The liver, it makes bile. And what does bile do? Just in your own words. Bile takes big drops of fat and makes them smaller. Those are the questions from the digestive system. So far, for the test, a week from today, we're going to do it on Wednesday. A week from today.
You mean Monday?
No, wait. Today's Monday.
Wednesday.
A week from this Wednesday. So in 9 days. Yeah. So a week from this Wednesday, the test is going to be on animal tissues, and I put up a video on that.
Wait, what?
A video on animal tissues. It's going to be on animal tissues. That's already posted. That's the 4, epithelial, muscle. And then this chapter, which is going to be a separate video, I'm going to stop recording this in about a minute, and I'm going to post it today. And then on today's Wednesday.
Yeah, I was about to say, they confusing this poor man. It's Wednesday, my guy.
A week from today. Monday, I'm going to talk about, one more class, I'm going to talk about the heart.
Oh my God.
And that's Monday, right?
Yeah.
You joking, right?
No. If you want, I can post a previous lecture about the heart if you want to get a head start on it. So it's those three chapters. So let me stop recording this one. But if you guys got questions.